This is my 1936 Ford V8 sedan, and it is mostly original. Mostly. In this video, I'll highlight some of the modifications I've made to my car over the years, and at the end, I will share the 5 most important upgrades that you should seriously consider if you're thinking about purchasing or restoring a car like this, so stick around. Like I just said, my 36 sedan here is largely original. Most passers-by and probably even early Ford enthusiasts will have no idea that this car does feature a few important upgrades. Now, when I talk about modifications, I've really only made changes that improve safety or convenience. I have absolutely zero desire to turn this thing into some sort of street rod, so I will never chop the top, install a big block Chevy, or go with a Mustang 2 front end. Nothing like that. I want this car to look like a 1936 Ford and, most importantly, speak with its original voice. Accordingly, we've got a Flathead V8 under the hood. There's a 3-speed manual transmission with torque tube drive. There are transverse leaf springs front and rear. We've got mechanical brakes, lever action shock absorbers, and of course, the original frame as it left the factory. This car looks, feels, and sounds original, but it's even better. So one of my favorite upgrades that I've made to this car is actually to the electrical system. So rather than 6 volts, I have upgraded to a 12-volt system. I had the generator here rewound for 12 volts. We've got a voltage regulator, and then of course I had the starter rewound for 12 volts as well. Now, a lot of people say you can run a 6-volt starter on a 12-volt system with no issues, but since I was completely restoring this car, I kind of wanted it done right, so I just took both of those components in and said, rewind these for 12 volts, and that's what we've got here. Now, a lot of people, of course, say a 6-volt system is perfectly fine, and of course, they have started and run cars for many decades, but I do think 12 volts is a smart decision if you're going through and completely restoring your car. You should get brighter headlights. You have fewer issues to worry about with grounding and wiring. Additionally, the car will start a whole lot faster. Whenever I hear a 6-volt car starting, I kind of die inside a little bit because it's always like, wah, wah, wah. This one, on the other hand, snaps to life in about half a crank. It's really fast. Then, of course, if you do need a jump start, it's very easy to do that quickly and safely because literally every other car out on the road today has a 12-volt electrical system. So some important advantages to consider if you're restoring one of these cars and you're kind of on the fence about either sticking with the 6-volt system or upgrading to 12. I say go 12. 10 and 2, or 10 and 2. So another upgrade I've made to this car is that I am running a 24-stud engine opposed to a 21 stud that would have come in this car from the factory. This is a 59L block, which is sort of from the middle of the production run of the Flathead V8, and again, that has 24 studs. These engines do have much better cooling than the earlier Flathead V8s because they put the water pumps down on the block rather than bolting them to the cylinder head, so keeping temps in check is very important with these engines. Beyond that, when I got the core, it was already bored 60 thousandths of an inch beyond the 3 3/16 of an inch size. My machinist took it another 20, so this engine is 80 thousandths of an inch beyond stock, which, with the standard 3 3/4 inch crankshaft, should give us about 251 cubic inches of overall displacement. A nice upgrade over what this would have had from the factory, which would have been 239. Beyond that, I've got the stock camshaft, there are stock cylinder head, stock intake, stock valves. So overall, this engine is very smooth. It delivers good, if not outstanding performance, but I'll tell you, it is a real pleasure to drive. Do you hear that? It's the next modification. Yes, I have installed dual exhaust on my car here. We've got tubular headers up front and then pipes running back, of course, to individual exhaust outlets. Now, if you remember back to a previous video, I used to just have straight pipes on this vehicle, but I'll tell you, that was a little bit too much. I mean, flatheads don't make a lot of power. They're never going to have that rumble like, say, a big block would, but it was still just a bit too much. So since then, I have installed a pair of cherry bomb mufflers that have quieted things down quite nicely. You still, however, do get a little bit of rumble, which I think sounds very sweet. So instead of running the so-called diver's helmet style distributor, I'm actually running a slightly later crab style Dizzy. Either way, they both mount right to the front of the engine and are driven off of the camshaft. Now, the crab style distributor is better because it's easier to work on, and it should come with a slightly different advanced mechanism that provides a little bit hotter performance. Overall, the crab style distributor is a very good upgrade for any early Ford V8 engine. Now, for a much closer look at the crab style distributor, make sure you click right over here because we featured that in another video that we just published. All right, we're at the back of the car again because there's another modification I've got to tell you about, and it is right here. I've added a luggage rack to this car. Doesn't look half bad, does it? This is actually, oddly enough, for a Ford Model A. I picked this up down at the Hershey swap meet for all of 40 bucks. It was pitted and rusty and nasty, but I sent it out to have it sandblasted and powder coated. I refinished the wood and of course added some stainless steel hardware. And overall it does look pretty nice, all for maybe 100 bucks all in. And that is the good news, because if you want to purchase a luggage rack specifically for a V8 car like this, they are many, many, many hundreds of dollars. I don't even know, maybe in the thousands of dollars these days. And I ain't spending that much. So the Model A luggage rack is a very nice thing to add. However, it is not a direct bolt-on. We actually had to make a couple brackets that go down to the frame. Nothing overly difficult, but there was a bit of work involved in getting this thing mounted to the back of my car. But overall, I'm very glad that I did this. I think it looks nice. I actually built a separate storage trunk that bolts to this, so I've got a little bit more room to carry things in the vehicle. And of course, this isn't a half bad place to sit if you're at a car show, if you bring a cushion to put down here on the luggage rack. So, as you probably know, the Ford Flathead V8 is notorious for running very hot. So to help keep tabs on things, I've actually installed under-hood temperature sensors, one in each cylinder head. If you see one of these dials spiking, you know you've got an issue potentially with that bank of cylinders. Then you can go in and address any issues. I like to think of these as basically cheap insurance. So one sort of period correct upgrade I have made is to the engine. Early V8 cars came with pressed on fiber timing gears. This is a fiber gear. It happens to be a slightly later bolt-on model, but you get the idea. And the advantage of this fiber material, which is sort of almost like a phenolic, is that they are nearly silent. These make basically no noise. The downside though is after like 80 years, sometimes the teeth will break off, and once they are stripped, your engine will no longer run and you will be walking home. Now the good news is, unlike an overhead valve engine, if that does happen, the pistons will never ever hit the valves. So you clean out the oil pan, you put a new gear on, and you're pretty much good to go. Now the upgrade that I have made is actually right here. I am running an aluminum timing gear, and you'd really have to screw something up to knock the teeth off of one of these. These are basically set for life. And that's what I like. The downside, of course, though, is they do make a little bit of noise. They kind of clack against the crankshaft gear, and my car has that from the front of the engine, which is a little bit annoying. I don't really care for it, but you're never, ever, ever going to have to worry about anything like that if you're running an aluminum gear. Now, of course, they do make aftermarket timing gears out of this phenolic-like fiber material. So if you do need one, you can go that route. However, I've heard horror stories about those where the teeth break off in like 100 miles and then you're stranded. So my recommendation, get an aluminum timing gear and then you never have to worry about it. Another internal engine upgrade I have made is to the valve train. So I have installed adjustable lifters. That's this one right over here. They make it super easy to set the valve train lash. You drop those in the lifter bore, you throw your valve assembly in, you grab your feeler gauges, you adjust the nut on the top here to your 12, 14, 16 thousandths of an inch, whatever the camshaft calls for, and you are good to go. This is a factory style lifter. It is not adjustable, so to set that clearance, you've got to either weld material on the bottom of the valve stem or grind it away, which is a colossal pain in the backside. The advantage though, this is a lot lighter, and of course once you do get that lash set, it should be good for the life of the engine. But if you're rebuilding one of these Flathead V8s, I highly recommend you just grab an adjustable lifter and you won't hate your life. I mean, you might still hate your life, but it won't be because you're trying to set the valve lash with that. I am all about convenience, which is why we have this thing right here. But what is it? Well, it's actually an oil distribution block. If you know anything about these engines, you know that the oil pressure sending units are mounted in just about the most inconvenient place possible. They put these things at the back, the top of the block down there, basically where you can't get any tools. And if you have to replace one of those things, it is a nightmare. So we made this little block here. There's a jumper line that comes up from the oil feed to the block where we've got the pressure sender. I've got this tube that goes to my aftermarket oil pressure unit. And then there's one other line that snakes over to here that goes to the oil filter. All of this is super easy to see and reach, which greatly improves serviceability. All right, there's a bonus modification I completely forgot about, and I remembered it when we were sort of shooting in this area for the oil distribution block. But right down here on the frame, you see that orange cylinder. That's basically a plastic cover that we made. If I unscrew it here, what we've done is add a hot lug to the engine compartment. So with these old Fords, up to 36 here, the battery is actually underneath the floor. It's underneath the driver's feet. And if you ever have to jump the car, if the battery dies and you jump start, whatever, you gotta pull up the carpet, you gotta remove a cover to access the battery. But not with this setup, because I've got the hot lug right there. I can connect the jumper cable to that and then ground it anywhere else on the engine and very easily be able to jump start the engine if I need to. Another upgrade I've made to the car, a rather substantial modification, is to the air filter. So if I take the top off here, I pull that just like that, I can pull it apart just like that, because what I have done, I've actually installed a washable conical air filter inside the housing. These cars normally came with an oil bath air filter, which I would have been totally fine running. However, a previous owner of this vehicle had actually glass bead blasted the whole assembly which is basically not serviceable, so it was all filled up with tiny glass pellets, and I'm not running that on the car, so this thing had to be torn apart anyway. So in that process, I've actually installed this conical filter, which might be a little bit hard to see. It's wrapped in this sort of copper mesh that the filter originally had, but this is serviceable. It comes apart and is washable as you would expect, and of course it also mounts right to the carburetor air horn as original, and I think this is a very nice upgrade for cleaner air and greater serviceability. Alrighty, another change I have made is right here. I'm actually running a Holley 2100 carburetor on my car, which, if memory serves, would have come out on the Y-block Fords from maybe 54 or 55. Don't quote me on that, I'm going off of memory, but it's slightly later. Basically, this carburetor is a derivation of the Holley 94, and this one does have slightly larger Venturis inside, so it does flow a little bit more air, which is why I've opted to run that carburetor on my engine, because it is slightly larger than stock. However, for 1936, the Ford cars came with the legendary Stromberg 97 carburetor, which you can see right here. It's very similar to the Holley. They are both very simple two-barrel carburetors, and they're nearly indistinguishable between the two. However, the hot rodders do tend to prefer the Stromberg here. The Holley has a vacuum-operated sort of power valve that can be a little bit more difficult to tune. This is much more mechanical, and it does look cool with some of the extra linkage on the outside. I am very pleased, however, with the Holley. It runs very well, and those carburetors are generally way cheaper to buy a used core than the Stromberg. But really, you can't go wrong with either one. Now I'm at the rear axle of my car because there's something I changed. It's not really a modification, but just something that I switched over. So originally we had 411 gearing in the rear axle of this car, which is way too low for modern driving. So I swapped in a set of 378 gears, which Ford also offered. I got them for a very good price, and it does improve the drivability on modern roads. You can go a little bit quicker today without having the engine screaming its lungs out. They did also offer a 354 set of gears, though those are pretty rare and consequently expensive to buy. In the aftermarket world, they also have a 3-to-5-to-1 ratio, but I think that might be a little bit too steep for these cars, especially if you live in mountainous or hilly terrain. But overall, the 378s, I'm quite pleased with those. All right, now I'm inside the car for a couple minutes to talk about some of the cabin enhancements that I've made, and one of the most important is right here. I'm actually running a transmission with 1940 and up gears, and I'm doing that for a very important reason, because those slightly later gears have a vastly improved synchronizer design, one with relatively affordable and replaceable blocker rings, so that gives you superior shifting between intermediate and high gears. And if you're building one of these cars, if you're restoring an early Ford V8, definitely consider swapping in those slightly later gears for much better shifting. And while we're talking about the transmission, there's one other modification that I have made right here. This is actually a shift lever from a 1939 Ford, and you can tell that because it's got this beautiful, very elegant double bend to it, which I think looks so cool. The 36 shift lever just had a single bend, and it just kind of looks like it's partially melted. This looks a lot nicer, and it puts the shift knob in a very comfortable position. It's also kind of nice to just rest your hand there occasionally while you are driving. So that is why I'm running the 39 lever. And the good news is, if you ever want to switch back, it takes about 60 seconds. You just unscrew the cap there, pull this lever out, drop the 36 shift lever in, screw the cap back down, and that's about it. Nothing has been damaged at all. Another modification that I've made to this car that I absolutely love is the 1937 steering box that I am running. It is orders of magnitude better than the 1936 box that I initially installed in this car when I restored it. 36 and earlier steering systems used a worm and sector design. 37 and up have a worm and roller configuration, which dramatically reduces internal friction. And when you compare the two boxes, 37 and up, it feels like you've practically installed power steering. That is how big the difference is. I can't emphasize enough how staggering that difference is. The 37 boxes are smoother and lighter. They also stay in adjustment a lot longer than the 36 box I had before, which I was constantly tinkering with to get rid of the slop that would come into the system after you drove the car. So if you're restoring one of these vehicles, you're building one from the ground up, definitely consider a later style steering box. You will not regret it, I promise you. Next up, let's talk about the windshield wipers, and it's kind of a sore subject for me because this is something I've been tinkering with and fighting with for many years, and at this point I've kind of just made my peace that the wipers suck, and I run some extra Rain-X on the windshield. So basically I'm running an electric wiper motor opposed to the vacuum system that would have originally been in this car because I didn't have any of the vacuum hardware. It was all missing, so I just kind of fabbed up my own setup here with, like I said, the electric motor. But this design, this whole system is crap. I really don't like it, and I'm just about at my wit's end screwing around with it. So I just, with the Rain-X, drive the car and try to enjoy it as best I can. Hey, really quick, if you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and of course, subscribe to the AutoEsoterica YouTube channel so we can bring you more content just like this. Plus design deep dives with Jason White. I love shooting those videos. We're gonna have how-tos, additional features about my car here, and a whole lot more. So again, make sure you're subscribed, and of course, thank you so much for watching. Another upgrade that I've made to this car that improves safety is the addition of an inline electric fuel pump. Now this is great for priming the carburetor if the vehicle has been sitting for several weeks. You don't have to crank the engine, crank, to try and get fuel up into the carburetor bowl. You just hit the momentary switch here, and it very quickly fills the carburetor so you can start the engine and go on your way. Additionally, as you know, the Flathead V8 runs very hot, and vapor lock is a serious concern with today's gasoline. So basically, when you're driving in hot weather, the engine kind of just falls on its face because the fuel is basically boiling in either the pump or the carburetor, which is really bad. So again, hitting that momentary switch for the fuel pump pretty much takes care of that problem in about 2 seconds, so you can keep driving and accelerating, because if you don't do that and vapor lock kicks in, the car stumbles and stutters, and it's a serious safety concern because you can't really accelerate. One modification that a ton of people have asked me about is right here, the tachometer, which these cars, of course, did not come with in 1936. Now, this gauge here is actually not a tachometer. It's a repurposed aircraft wheel speed sensor. One of my dad's buddies picked this up at a swap meet for a couple bucks, didn't know what to do with it, gave it to us, and we were able to put it to good use in my car right here. We had to print a new face for the gauge itself here. We calibrated it with this small handheld tachometer that I have in my toolbox, and everything seems to work pretty well. Indicates, of course, the engine revs. How does this work, though? Well, it's pretty fascinating. So we've got a flex drive cable that actually runs from the crankshaft pulley bolt, and that cable goes up to a very small generator. That generator creates electricity that then gets sent to the tachometer itself, so it shows you how quickly the engine is turning. And it's just a fascinating way of repurposing some old technology, and it looks so cool as well. All right, we've got a couple more alterations right in this area of the vehicle, so let's knock those out right quick. And number one is this, an aftermarket set of gauges. We've got temperature, voltage, and of course, oil pressure. Very important things to keep tabs on. I highly recommend you install an aftermarket set of gauges in your classic car. These are cheap, and it's just good insurance, especially if you don't necessarily trust the original instrumentation. Now, beyond that, we also have this beautiful bank of switches here. I've put them all in one out-of-the-way location. Most people don't even know this is here. It's really hard to see tucked underneath the dashboard. But we've got my switch here for the fuel pump, windshield wipers, fog lights, and then the blower motor for the heater and the fan speed control right there. There are also 2 empty slots right here. I've just got switches in there to fill those holes, but if I want to add any other features to this car, maybe an electric cooling fan or something, those are all set and ready to go. All right, in addition to all of that other stuff, I have also installed LED headlight bulbs in my car here, and they do put out more light than the original incandescents, and the light itself is much whiter and crisper, though I'll tell you these things are still not very good at all, so I do try to avoid driving at night, though if I am caught out and about after dark, I will also, of course, turn on these fog lights, which will put out a bit more light as well, and those, of course, are another modification that I've made to the car. As you can see, I have also added turn signals because zero drivers, absolutely none of them, are going to have any idea what hand gestures outside the window mean. So turn signals are a very good safety enhancing feature on an old car like this. Similarly, at the rear of the car, I have added LED tail lights. There's also an LED center high mounted stop lamp, or CHMSL for short. And of course, since these are LEDs, they turn on instantly and they're a lot brighter than incandescent bulbs, so that should help improve safety. Additionally, with the CHMSL here, as its name suggests, it's nice and high, right in the field of view of other drivers, so they should be able to see that thing turn on when you hit the brakes, because with the standard taillights, they're so low, they're like knee level. A lot of people aren't looking that low, so that's why I added the CHMSL here, which also works in conjunction, I might add, with the turn signals. Half of it will flash for one direction, half for the other, which is another great feature to have. Of course, if you do have an old car like this, put LED taillights in it for improved safety. keeping unwanted heat and noise out of the cabin, I have also installed the Eastwood equivalent of Dynamat to all of the body panels that I could actually reach. And the Eastwood version is a little bit cheaper than Dynamat, which of course is like this rubber-backed foil product that you stick onto the body to help keep that heat and noise out. And I'll tell you, it does a remarkably good job. Just check this out. Hear how solid that is? It's like this car was chiseled out of stone. It really does make a huge difference in keeping noise and heat out of the interior. Well, as fitted from the factory, we still have a fabric roof insert, which, yes, I absolutely hate, but making it less crappy, I did do one important modification. So originally, this was pretty much just a vinyl insert with some chicken wire and wooden crossbows, which is not very sturdy. So what I did, kept the crossbows, but added some sheet metal underneath there. So this is a lot sturdier and more robust than it was when this car left the factory. Of all the upgrades made to this car, there's only one that I didn't actually have to purchase myself. At some point in its history, this car was fitted with brake floaters. When I took everything apart, I cleaned them up. They were in perfect condition, so I have been running them ever since I put the braking system back together on this vehicle. So what do brake floaters do? Well, in short, they improve the stopping performance. They help the car slow down with less pedal effort. So basically what you've got is this little assembly that goes at the top where the brake shoes come together, and it allows them to move a little bit. It provides a bit of self-energizing action, which means less pedal effort for better deceleration, which of course is a very good thing in an old car like this where you don't have any brake assistance, any vacuum booster or anything like that. Alrighty, the last modification I have made to my car is arguably the most important of the bunch, and it is right here. I'm of course talking about stickers, and each one of these adds what? At least 5 horsepower, and I've got 2 on this side, 2 on the other side, so what? That's at least 20 additional horsepower for just pennies. That is an incredible value. And of course this one right here, 1.21 gigawatts, is a reference to the movie Back to the Future. And I think when we hit 88 miles per hour, we're gonna see some serious shit. So those are a few of the modifications, or rather kind of a lot of upgrades that I've made to my 36 Ford. But here are the 5 most important enhancements that you should seriously consider if you're thinking about getting one of these old Fords. And number 5 on my list, of course, is upgrading to a later model Flathead V8 engine. Of course, the earlier versions, the 21 stud engines, will run just fine, but if you go with a 24 stud engine, particularly from the 59 series, these engines provide much better cooling than the earlier design. The water pumps are actually down on the block itself rather than mounted to the cylinder heads. These engines are notorious for running very hot, so anything you can do to ensure that the temperatures stay in check is going to improve your driving enjoyment. So consider a 24 stud block if you can. Additionally, aside from that better cooling, there are many more aftermarket parts available for 24 stud blocks, so if you want to spice things up in the future, that will be an option if you go with the slightly later model Flathead. Point number 4, I highly recommend you run a transmission with 1940 and up gears. These things shift much better thanks to the superior synchronizer design. The synchronizer blocker rings are also replaceable. They are serviceable, so if something does go wrong down the road, you can relatively easily and cheaply fix it. So run those 1940 and up gears. I think you'll be very happy. Point number 3, aftermarket gauges. They're cheap, they're relatively easy to install. Throw a set on your car so you can keep tabs, particularly on the engine temperature and of course oil pressure. It's just a smart modification to do. Point number 2, an inline fuel pump. Not only does this help with priming the carburetor to help the engine start a lot quicker after the vehicle has been sitting. You don't have to sit there cranking it, trying to get fuel up into the carburetor bowl. You can just hit the switch and prime it in just a few seconds. But an inline fuel pump also helps almost immediately eliminate vapor lock, which is a serious issue with these engines and today's fuel. So consider adding an inline pump. It's a very good thing for safety. And finally, my #1 recommendation if you're considering purchasing or restoring one of these cars is that you add LED lighting, particularly LED tail lamps, turn signals, and an LED CHMSL, the center high-mounted stoplight. You know, nobody is looking at about shin level where the tail lights are on these cars. Everyone's eyes are up much higher these days, so that center high-mounted stop lamp is really going to do a lot to help prevent you from getting rear-ended by inattentive drivers. And as you know, those folks are everywhere, not paying attention to the road, and you don't have a lot of safety features beyond safety glass in these cars. So anything you can do to prevent a collision is a very, very smart upgrade to make. But anyway, those are my 5 recommendations for enhancements you should consider. But if you've got any questions or comments, make sure you leave those down below. Next up, click right over here to check out a feature where I explain how to shift an early Ford V8 transmission without ever grinding a gear. And if you know the secrets, it's actually very simple. AutoEsoterica is a production of Pixel Shift Media. Pixel Shift.